I'm driving back to the place that destroyed my life, carrying the cursed rock that's been sitting in my dresser drawer for 20 years, and I can feel it watching me through the box. Welcome to Verified Souls. Tonight we're walking the trails of Arizona's Petrified Forest after dark, where ancient stones hold memories, park rangers answer calls from the dead, and lightning brings fossilized giants back to life. 10 encounters that will make you question whether some places should ever be disturbed. If you survive all 10 stories, drop a petrified emoji in the comments, but only if you promise never to take anything from the forest. And for those brave enough to face the darkness with us every week, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because these stories choose their audience carefully. Now, let's begin with a woman who thought 20 years was long enough to escape her mistake. She was wrong. I'm driving back to the place that destroyed my life, carrying the cursed rock that's been sitting in my dresser drawer for 20 years, and I can feel it watching me through the box. My hands are shaking on the wheel, and it's not from the coffee I drank 3 hours ago. It's fear. Pure, suffocating fear that I should have felt 2 decades ago when I was 17 and stupid and thought taking one small piece of petrified wood wouldn't matter. The highway stretches ahead of me, empty at 2 in the morning, and I keep glancing at the passenger seat where the cardboard box sits. I wrapped the wood in 3 layers of newspaper, sealed it with packing tape, and put it in that box like that would somehow contain what it's done to me. But I can still feel it. That cold, patient weight. That awareness. You're probably thinking I'm insane, that a rock can't be aware of anything, but you haven't lived my life for the past 20 years. You haven't watched everything you love crumble because you were too arrogant to believe in curses. It started small. A week after I took that piece of wood from the Crystal Forest Trail, my dog got hit by a car. My childhood dog, the one who'd slept at the foot of my bed since I was 8. The vet said it was quick, that she didn't suffer, but I knew. I knew it was because of what I'd taken. My parents thought I was being dramatic, dealing with grief in a weird way, but then my dad lost his job. Then my mom's cancer came back. Then the house caught fire. All within 6 months. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. Bad luck happens to everyone, right? But the bad luck never stopped. It followed me to college, where my roommate died in a freak accident. It followed me into my marriage, which lasted 3 miserable years before my husband left me for someone else. It followed me through 7 jobs, each one ending in disaster. And through it all, that piece of petrified wood sat in my dresser drawer, smooth and cold and patient. The turnoff for the park is coming up, and my stomach is twisting itself into knots. I'm not supposed to be here at this hour. The park closes at sunset, and what I'm about to do is technically illegal, but I can't wait until morning. I can't spend another night with that thing in my possession. Last week, I woke up at 3 a.m. and found myself standing in front of my dresser, with the drawer open, holding the wood, with no memory of getting out of bed. That's when I knew I had to bring it back. That's when I knew it was getting worse. I kill my headlights as I approach the park boundary and pull onto a dirt access road I found on Google Maps. My heart is pounding so hard I can feel it in my throat. The desert at night is a different world. And the darkness out here isn't like darkness in the city. It's complete. Absolute. The kind of darkness that makes you remember humans are supposed to be afraid of the dark for a reason. I grab the box and my flashlight, and the moment my feet hit the ground, the temperature drops. I'm talking about a 20-degree drop in an instant. My breath comes out in clouds, and this is Arizona in September. It shouldn't be cold, but I know why it is. I tuck the box under my arm and start walking, using the flashlight to navigate through the scrub brush toward the area where I think the Crystal Forest Trail begins. Every step feels wrong. The desert should be alive with sound at night. Insects, small animals, the wind. But there's nothing. Just silence so thick it feels like it's pressing against my eardrums. And my footsteps. I can hear my footsteps crunching on the dry ground, but I can hear something else too. Other footsteps, matching my rhythm exactly but slightly delayed, like an echo that doesn't quite sync up. I stop walking. The echo stops a half-second later. My mouth goes dry. I spin around, shining my flashlight in every direction, but there's nothing behind me. Just empty desert and petrified logs scattered across the landscape like the bones of something ancient and angry. I force myself to keep moving because going back to the car means taking that wood with me, and I can't do that. I won't survive another night with it. The trail markers start appearing in my flashlight beam, and I recognize where I am. I'm close. The Crystal Forest area is just ahead, and somewhere in there is the spot where 17-year-old me thought she was clever, thought she was special, thought the rules didn't apply to her. I was so wrong. I'm walking faster now, my breath coming in quick gasps, and the footsteps behind me are getting louder. They're not even trying to match my pace anymore. They're closer. I can feel whoever, whatever, it is right behind me, and I refuse to turn around because I know if I see what's following me, I'll lose whatever fragile grip on sanity I have left. The petrified logs are everywhere now. Massive sections of ancient trees lying across the ground, their rainbow minerals gleaming faintly in my flashlight. They're beautiful and terrifying, and I can't remember which one I took my piece from. I stop in the middle of the trail, turning in a circle, trying to remember. Was it the big one near that cluster of rocks? Was it the one split down the middle? Why can't I remember? My flashlight flickers, dies, comes back on. In that brief moment of darkness, I hear breathing that isn't mine. I slam my hand against the flashlight, and it stabilizes, but my hands are shaking so badly I can barely hold it. I need to put this wood down. I need to get out of here. I kneel and set the box on the ground, my fingers fumbling with the tape. The breathing is louder now, coming from multiple directions. Like there are people standing in a circle around me in the darkness just beyond my light. I rip open the box and pull out the petrified wood. It's heavier than I remember, and it's warm. Stone shouldn't be warm. I stand up holding it in both hands, and I whisper into the darkness that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never should have taken it. I place it on the ground next to one of the larger logs, and the moment it leaves my hands, the relief is immediate. It's like a weight lifting off my chest, like I can breathe fully for the first time in 20 years. I turn to leave, reaching into my jacket pocket for my car keys, but my pocket is empty. My heart stops. I check my other pocket. Nothing. I check my jeans. Nothing. The keys were in my right jacket pocket. I know they were because I felt them there when I was walking. I spin back toward where I set down the wood, shining my flashlight across the ground, and that's when I see them. There are dozens of pieces of petrified wood scattered around the area where I just was. Dozens. All different sizes, all arranged in a circle, and they're all glowing. Not brightly, but with this faint pulsing luminescence that makes my stomach drop. These are other people's returned pieces. Other people who took wood and brought it back and thought that would be enough. And then I hear it, my own voice, calling from deeper in the forest, toward the Badlands. But it's not my voice now. It's my voice from 20 years ago, high and excited, and saying the exact words I said when I picked up that piece of wood. This one's perfect. Nobody will even notice it's gone. I run. I don't care about the keys anymore. I run back toward where I think I left the car, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly, and behind me I can hear more voices now. All of them mine. All of them from that day. Laughing. Talking to my friend Sarah who was with me. Joking about curses being fake. Each voice is coming from a different direction, surrounding me, hurting me. I break through the brush and see my car, and I've never been so grateful for anything in my life. I try the door handle knowing it'll be locked, but it opens. The keys are in the ignition. The engine is running. I don't remember leaving it running. I throw myself into the driver's seat and slam the door, locking it immediately. My chest is heaving, and I can barely see through the tears streaming down my face. As I throw the car into reverse, my headlights sweep across the desert, and I see them. Figures standing at the edge of the light. 5 of them. They're wearing clothes from different decades, different eras, and they're all holding pieces of petrified wood. They're all watching me. And as I speed away, gravel spraying, I see one of them wave. It's a young woman in clothes from the 90s. She looks exactly like me at 17. I made it home 3 hours ago. The bad luck has stopped. I can feel it. My chest doesn't hurt anymore. The constant anxiety is gone. But here's the thing that's keeping me awake right now. The thing that's made me tell you this story. When I got home and checked my dresser drawer, the piece of petrified wood is back, sitting exactly where I kept it for 20 years. And underneath it is a note in handwriting I don't recognize. It says, "Thank you for returning yourself. The forest accepts your offering. Come back soon." I don't know what that means. I don't want to know what that means, but I can feel it calling me again, stronger than before. And I'm terrified that one night soon I'm going to wake up on that trail with no memory of driving there. If that happens, if I don't come back, you'll know why. The forest doesn't want the wood back. It never did. It wants the people who were arrogant enough to think they could take from it without consequence. And I'm starting to think I've been claimed. The radio crackled at 2:47 a.m. with coordinates I'd never heard before, and a woman's voice begging me to hurry. I've been a park ranger at Petrified Forest for 32 years, and I know every square inch of this place. I know every trail, every landmark, every service road. The coordinates she gave me didn't exist on any map I'd ever seen. But her voice was panicked, desperate, and you don't ignore a distress call just because it doesn't make sense. So I grabbed my gear, radioed dispatch that I was responding, and headed out into the darkness. I had 5 days left until retirement. 5 days. I should have let someone else take it. The coordinates led me toward the northern section of the park, past the Painted Desert Inn, into an area we don't usually patrol at night because there's nothing out there but badlands and restricted zones. My truck's headlights cut through the darkness, and I kept checking my GPS, watching the distance tick down. 1/2 mile, 1/4 mile. The woman's voice kept playing in my head, the way she'd said please, like something was right behind her, like she was running out of time. When I reached the coordinates, I stopped the truck and sat there for a moment, engine idling, scanning the area with my spotlight. Nothing. Just empty desert, striped hills in the distance, and silence. I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, I'm at the location. No visual on the caller. Can you confirm the call came through?" There was static, then the dispatcher's voice, tinny and confused. "What call?" "We haven't received any calls tonight." My stomach tightened. I heard it on my radio. "Female, distressed," gave me coordinates. More static. Nothing's showing in our log. "You want me to send backup?" I should have said yes. I should have driven back to the station right then, but I saw something in my spotlight. Tire tracks. Fresh tire tracks, cutting through the dirt, heading deeper into the restricted area. And they weren't from any modern vehicle. The tread pattern was wrong, too wide, too shallow, like something from decades ago. I put my truck in gear and followed them, telling dispatch I was investigating and would check in shortly. I never made that check-in call. The tracks led me down what looked like an old service road that wasn't on my GPS. The kind of road that's been abandoned so long it's almost disappeared back into the landscape. My truck bounced over ruts and rocks, and the further I went, the colder it got. I cranked up the heat, but it didn't help. My breath was fogging up the windshield. And that's when I smelled it. Cigarette smoke. Not the modern kind, but that old, unfiltered smell my grandfather used to have on his clothes. Heavy and sweet and wrong because I was alone in a sealed truck. The headlights caught something ahead. A vehicle. A station wagon, powder blue, parked at an angle like it had pulled over in a hurry. I stopped 20 feet behind it and hit my spotlight. The paint was pristine, not a speck of dust on it despite being in the middle of the desert, and the chrome bumper gleamed like it had just been polished. It was a 1950s Chevrolet Bel Air. I've seen enough classic car shows to recognize it, but what it was doing out here, looking brand new, I had no idea. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck. The cold hit me like a physical force, and I could see my breath in thick clouds. The temperature had to be below freezing, and that's impossible for this area, even in the dead of night. I approached the station wagon, calling out, "This is Park Service. Anyone here? Need assistance?" No response. I shined my light through the driver's window. Empty. Keys still in the ignition. A purse on the passenger seat. A child's toy in the back. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, hand going to my radio, and saw her. A woman in a park ranger uniform, but not the current style. Hers was vintage, the kind they wore in the 50s, with the old-style Stetson hat and high-waisted pants. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, and she was walking toward me with this confused, disoriented expression. Her lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. "Ma'am," I called out. "Are you all right? Did you call for help?" She stopped about 10 feet away from me and tilted her head, like she was trying to remember something. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, echoing strangely in the open air. "I can't find my way back. I've been trying to find my way back." "To where?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the ice forming in my gut. "To the inn," she said. "I work at the Painted Desert Inn. I just stepped out for some air during my shift, but now I can't find it. Everything looks different. The Painted Desert Inn hasn't operated as a working facility with overnight staff in decades. It's a museum now. I know the history of this place better than anyone. And something about her uniform, her face, was triggering a memory I couldn't quite place." "What's your name?" I asked, taking a step closer. She smiled, but it was sad, lost. "I'm a ranger here." "Like you. I need to get back before my supervisor notices I'm gone." She reached up to adjust her hat, and that's when I saw her name tag in my flashlight beam. My blood went cold. I knew that name. Every ranger who works here knows that name. There's a memorial plaque at the Painted Desert Inn with that exact name on it. She died in 1958. Smoke inhalation from a fire that started in the kitchen during her overnight shift. She was 26 years old. I took a step back, my hand shaking on the flashlight. "You need to come with me," I said, trying to keep my voice professional, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. "I can help you get back." She looked relieved and started walking toward me, but with each step I could see her more clearly. The soot. There was soot on her uniform, smudges of black across her face and hands. And she was coughing. Small coughs at first, then deeper, her hand coming up to her mouth. She stopped, doubling over, and when she looked up at me, smoke was coming from her lips. Not like cigarette smoke. Thick, dark smoke, the kind that comes from burning wood and fabric and worse things. "I'm so tired," she said, her voice crackling like fire. "I just want to go home. I've been trying to go home for so long." She took another step toward me, and I could feel the heat radiating off her now, intense and suffocating, replacing the cold. I backed toward my truck, and that's when my radio crackled to life. But it wasn't dispatch. It was my own voice, screaming my name, begging someone to send help, describing a situation I wasn't in yet, but somehow knew was coming. The woman in the vintage uniform looked at the radio, then at me, and her expression changed. Recognition, horror. She looked down at her hands, at the soot and the smoke, and she started to scream. The sound was inhuman, a combination of agony and rage and desperation that made my ears ring. I ran for my truck, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. She was running toward me now, fully engulfed in flames that gave off no light, just smoke and shadow. I started the engine, threw it in reverse, and floored it. Through my rear-view mirror, I watched her collapse where her station wagon was parked, the flames consuming her completely. And then she was gone. The station wagon was gone. The old road was gone. I was sitting in the middle of empty desert with no tire tracks but my own. I grabbed my radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, I need immediate assistance." The radio cut me off with my own voice again, but this time it was different. It was describing my retirement party, the one scheduled for this Friday. But in the recording, something goes wrong at the party. Something about the Painted Desert Inn, about smoke and fire and people screaming. It was describing my future, and it wasn't good. I drove straight back to the station, filed a report that I knew sounded insane, and submitted my resignation effective immediately. I didn't wait 5 days. I didn't wait 5 hours. I cleaned out my locker, turned in my badge and radio, and left before the sun came up. My supervisor tried to call me a dozen times that first day, asking what happened, saying I was 3 days short of full retirement benefits, asking if I'd at least come to the Friday party they'd planned. I didn't go. I watched the news instead. There was a small fire at the Painted Desert Inn that Friday night. Electrical malfunction, they said. Started in the old kitchen area, the part they'd been restoring to look like it did in the 1950s. Nobody was seriously hurt, but several people were treated for smoke inhalation. My former supervisor was one of them. When I saw his photo in the article, I recognized the look in his eyes. The same look that woman in the vintage uniform had. Lost. Disoriented. Like he'd seen something he couldn't explain. I haven't been back to the park. I get letters sometimes, forwarded from my old address. Invitations to ranger reunions, newsletter updates, that sort of thing. Last month, I got one that wasn't like the others. No return address, postmarked from inside the park. Inside was a single photograph, black and white. Dated 1958. It showed the ranger staff at the Painted Desert Inn, all lined up for a group photo. The woman I met was in the front row, smiling, alive. But standing in the back, partially obscured by shadow, was someone in a modern ranger uniform. Someone who looked exactly like me. I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if I responded to a distress call from the past, or if something in that park has been replaying the same tragedy for 67 years, trying to rewrite the ending. What I do know is that some calls aren't meant to be answered, some roads aren't meant to be traveled, and some people who ask for help have been asking for so long, they don't remember what they're asking for anymore. I was 3 days away from a full pension, 32 years of service, but I'm alive, and I'm not trapped in that park, reliving the worst night of my life over and over. So I'll take the financial hit. Some places hold on to their dead, and the Petrified Forest doesn't let go easily. I learned that on my last patrol, the patrol I should never have taken. On day 3 of my field study, I noticed the petrified logs along the Crystal Forest Trail had rearranged themselves overnight, and they were forming numbers. I'm a geology PhD student. I've spent 6 years studying fossilization patterns, mineral composition, and sedimentary structures. I don't believe in supernatural phenomena. I believe in data, in evidence, in things I can measure and document, but I also believe in my own eyes. And what I saw over the course of 12 days in that park has broken something fundamental in the way I understand reality. I arrived at Petrified Forest National Park in late October to conduct research for my dissertation on crystallization patterns in permineralized wood. Fascinating stuff if you're into geology, mind-numbingly boring if you're not. The park gave me permission to access restricted areas and take detailed measurements of log formations across multiple sites. I set up my base camp near the Crystal Forest area, and for the first 2 days, everything was exactly as it should be. I photographed logs, took mineral samples, recorded GPS coordinates, measured dimensions. Standard fieldwork, scientific, rational. On the morning of day 3, I returned to a cluster of logs I'd been documenting, and something was off. I couldn't pinpoint it at first, just a nagging feeling that things weren't quite where I'd left them. So I pulled up my photos from the previous day and compared them to what I was seeing. The logs had moved, not dramatically, maybe 6 inches here, a foot there, but they'd definitely moved. And more than that, they'd moved into a specific pattern. When I looked at them from above, using my drone camera, they formed the number 7. I stood there for 20 minutes, telling myself I was wrong, telling myself I'd misremembered their positions, that my photos were from a different cluster, that the desert heat was playing tricks on my perception. But I'm trained to observe details. I had precise GPS coordinates. These logs, some weighing over 1,000 pounds, had moved. I documented everything, took new measurements, and tried to come up with rational explanations. Seismic activity, ground subsidence, flash flooding from a storm I'd somehow slept through. None of it made sense. The ground was dry and stable. There'd been no earthquakes, no weather events. That night, I set up motion-activated cameras around the log cluster. If something was moving them, animals or people, or some geological phenomenon I didn't understand, I'd have evidence. I barely slept, lying in my tent listening to every sound, waiting for the cameras to trigger. They never did. But when I checked them the next morning, walking the half-mile from my camp to the site, I knew before I even got there that something had changed. I could feel it. The logs had moved again. This time they formed the number 6. Perfect, deliberate, impossible. And my cameras had recorded nothing. 8 hours of footage showing the logs sitting completely still, and yet between frames, they'd somehow shifted into a new configuration. I checked every piece of equipment, checked the timestamps, checked my own sanity. Everything was functioning correctly except for the fundamental laws of physics. I should have left then. I should have packed up my gear, driven back to the university, and found a new dissertation topic. But here's the thing about being a scientist. You can't just walk away from unexplained phenomena. You have to understand it. You have to find the answer. So I stayed, and I documented everything with obsessive precision. I brought in additional cameras, set up seismographs, placed sensors around each log. I was going to catch whatever was doing this. Day 5, the number became a 5. Day 6, a 4. My equipment continued to malfunction in ways that shouldn't be possible. Cameras would shut off for exactly 30 seconds each night at 3:17 a.m., and during those 30 seconds, the logs moved. Seismographs recorded no vibrations. Temperature sensors showed a localized drop to below freezing around the logs, while the ambient desert temperature remained in the 60s. I was documenting the impossible, and I couldn't stop. I reached out to my advisor, sent him the data, the photos, the video evidence. He called me concerned, asking if I was getting enough sleep, enough water, suggesting the isolation was affecting me. When I insisted the data was real, he gently recommended I come back early and take a break. No one would believe me. I had irrefutable evidence of something that couldn't exist, and it meant nothing because it contradicted everything we know about how matter and energy work. By day 7, when the logs formed a 3, I stopped trying to explain it. I just watched. I set up a chair during the day and sat there, staring at logs that had been dead for 225 million years, waiting to see what happened when they reached 0. Other hikers would pass by, and I'd ask them if they noticed anything strange about the log formation. They'd look at me confused, shake their heads, and keep walking. It was like I was the only one who could see the pattern. The only one the countdown was meant for. Day 8. 2. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat 50 feet from the logs with my most expensive camera, my eyes locked on them, determined to see how they moved. At 3:17 a.m., My camera died. The battery indicator had shown full charge, but it died instantly. And in the darkness, I heard it. A sound like stone grinding against stone, deep and resonant, coming from the earth itself. When my camera powered back on 30 seconds later, the logs had formed a 1. I spent all of day 9 researching the history of the area, Native American legends, geological surveys, park records, anything that might explain what was happening. I found references to the petrified wood being sacred, to the logs being the bones of giants, to curses placed on those who disturbed them. But nothing about countdowns, nothing about warnings. As the sun set that evening, I made a decision. I would stay at the site overnight. I would be there when the countdown reached 0. I would finally see what this was all about. I set up my tent right next to the logs. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly, far below what was normal. I could see my breath inside my tent, could hear my teeth chattering despite my heavy sleeping bag. The desert was completely silent. No insects, no wind, nothing. Just that oppressive, waiting silence. I checked my watch obsessively. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. At 3:15, I unzipped my tent and stepped out, my flashlight in one hand, my phone recording in the other. The logs were glowing, faintly, like embers buried in ash, a soft orange light emanating from within the stone. I stepped closer, my scientific curiosity overriding my terror, and I could feel heat radiating from them. Petrified wood doesn't generate heat, it's stone. But these were warm, getting warmer, and the glow was intensifying. At exactly 3:17, my phone died, my flashlight died, and in the complete darkness, I heard the grinding sound again, but this time it was everywhere, surrounding me, coming from beneath my feet. The ground trembled, not like an earthquake, but like something rolling over. Something massive shifting position after millions of years of sleep. The glow from the logs became bright enough to see by, and I watched them move. Not sliding across the ground, but sinking into it, dropping vertically as if the earth was swallowing them. Where they disappeared, cracks formed, spreading outward in geometric patterns that were too perfect to be natural. I ran. I don't remember grabbing my gear or breaking down my tent. I just remember running through the darkness, falling, getting up, running more. When I reached my car as the sun was rising, I looked back at the crystal forest area. The logs were back in their original positions. The cracks were gone. Everything looked exactly as it had on day 1. Except for one thing. Where the countdown had been, where the logs had formed numbers for 9 days, there was now a message. I could see it clearly from half a mile away. The logs arranged in letters big enough to read from space. Not wood. Bars. And beneath the earth, in the area where I'd been camping, I swear I could see something moving under the surface. Something vast. Something that had been counting down the days until it could test the strength of its prison. I drove straight back to the university without stopping. I withdrew from my PhD program 2 weeks later. My advisor tried to convince me to stay, to finish my dissertation, but I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him that the petrified forest isn't a fossil bed. It's a containment system. That those logs aren't ancient trees turned to stone. They're bars in a cage built 225 million years ago by something that understood what was buried there needed to stay buried. I don't know what happens when something imprisoned for that long finally breaks free. I don't know if the countdown resets or if it was a one-time warning. What I do know is that I check the news from Arizona every single day, and I'm terrified of the headline I might see. Because I was there. I watched the countdown reach 0. I saw what's underneath, and I know that somewhere in that park, something ancient is testing its prison bars, pushing a little harder each time, waiting for the moment when stone finally crumbles and 225 million years of patience finally pays off. The park is still open. People visit every day, taking photos of the beautiful petrified logs, marveling at the colors, the size, the history. None of them know they're standing on top of something that's been waiting longer than humanity has existed. None of them know the logs aren't fossils. They're a warning that we've forgotten how to read. If you're watching this footage I uploaded automatically, it means I never made it off Blue Mesa, and whatever answered when I called out is still looking for me. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I recorded out there, what I documented in those last 3 hours before my equipment went dead, and something wearing my voice found me in the dark. I host a paranormal podcast, or I used to, and my whole brand was debunking supernatural claims with science and skepticism. The Petrified Forest curse seemed like perfect content. Easy views. Another fake legend torn apart by logic and evidence. I was so confident. So stupid. I arrived at Blue Mesa around 4 in the afternoon. Golden hour. Perfect lighting for B-roll footage. The Badlands there are incredible. These layered hills in shades of purple and gray and white, like something from another planet. I set up my recording equipment along the Overlook Trail, 3 cameras at different angles. My main audio recorder with a professional shotgun mic, backup recorder in my pocket, and my phone for behind-the-scenes content. I was planning to record until well after dark, capture some spooky atmosphere, then spend the night in my car and film the sunrise. Professional production, engaging content. Proof that there's nothing supernatural about this place. I started recording my intro around 5:30, doing my usual thing. Standing with the Badlands behind me, explaining the legend of the curse, the letters from people claiming bad luck, all of it. I was articulate, confident, maybe a little condescending about people who believed in curses. I wrapped the intro with my catchphrase about bringing light to darkness and truth to superstition. When I played it back to check the audio levels, that's when I first heard it. A whisper underneath my voice, so quiet I almost missed it. It sounded like it was saying my catchphrase along with me, but the timing was off. The whisper finished the sentence a full second before I did. I checked my equipment. No interference, clean signal, no explanation for the audio artifact. I chalked it up to wind or equipment malfunction and kept recording. The sun was setting, painting the Badlands in orange and red, and I was getting great footage. I did a walking shot along the trail talking about the geological formation of the area, the bentonite clay, the Chinle Formation, all very scientific and rational. When I reviewed that footage, there were footsteps in the audio, not mine. I was standing still during playback, but the audio clearly captured footsteps, matching my pace exactly from the walking shot, continuing for 10 seconds after I'd stopped moving. The sun dropped below the horizon fast, the way it does in the desert, and the temperature fell with it. I grabbed my jacket from my backpack and set up for the night shoot. This was going to be the meat of the episode, me alone in the dark in this supposedly cursed location, proving there was nothing to fear. I had my camera on a tripod, my main audio recorder running, and I held my backup recorder as I walked to the edge of the overlook, where the trail looks down into the striped canyons of Blue Mesa. I decided to do something for the audience, something interactive. I called out hello into the canyon, waiting for the echo. It came back clear and normal, my voice bouncing off the layered rocks. Then I said my name, loud and clear, projecting it into the darkness. The echo came back, but it was wrong. It didn't sound like an echo. It sounded like someone else saying my name in my exact voice, with the same inflection, but with intention behind it. Like they were responding, not reflecting. My skin went cold. I held up my backup recorder and called out again. Hello? Is anyone out there? The response came faster this time, overlapping with the natural echo, creating this disorienting double effect. Hello? Is anyone out there? But the second voice wasn't echoing from the canyon. It was coming from behind me, back toward the parking lot. I spun around, my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just my equipment, my car in the distance, an empty trail. I went back to my camera to check if it had captured audio of the voice behind me. It had. But it had also captured something else. In the video, while I was looking into the canyon, there was a figure standing at the edge of the frame. Just standing there, watching me. The figure looked exactly like me. Same jacket, same posture, but the face was obscured by shadow. I watched myself on camera walk toward where the figure should be, but in real time, I hadn't seen anyone. The figure had been invisible to my eyes, but perfectly visible to my camera. My hands were shaking as I checked the timestamp. This was recorded 4 minutes ago. 4 minutes ago, something that looked like me was standing 15 feet away and I never saw it. I grabbed my main recorder and played back the last 10 minutes of audio. What I heard made my blood freeze. Underneath everything, underneath my voice and the wind and my footsteps, there was breathing. Multiple sources of breathing surrounding my position, and they'd been there since the sun went down. I should have run to my car right then, but I'm a content creator, and part of my brain was still thinking about the episode, about the evidence I was capturing, about how this was either the greatest hoax someone was playing on me or genuine documentation of something impossible. I kept recording. I did a piece to camera explaining what I'd found, holding up my recorder, playing the audio for my audience. As I was speaking, my phone started vibrating in my pocket. Text notifications, dozens of them, all coming through at once even though I had no service out here. I pulled out my phone and my stomach dropped. The texts were from my own number, sent to my own number. All of them timestamps from the future, minutes ahead of the current time, and they were all the same message. Stop calling to us. We're already here. As I stared at my screen, a new text came through, timestamped 2 minutes in the future. Look behind you in 2 minutes. You'll see what answered. I couldn't move. I stood there watching the clock on my phone count down, every rational part of my brain screaming at me to leave. But I was frozen. Content creator instinct kicked in, and I repositioned my camera, angled it to capture whatever was going to happen. 1 minute, 30 seconds. I kept my phone in my hand, recording, my other hand gripping my flashlight so hard my knuckles were white. 10 seconds. At exactly the timestamp from the text, I turned around. There were 7 of them. 7 figures standing in a line across the trail between me and my car. All of them looked exactly like me. Same clothes, same build, but they were all wrong in different ways. One was too tall. One's proportions were off, arms slightly too long. One had its head tilted at an angle that would break a human neck. And they were all holding recording devices, phones, and cameras, all pointed at me. I could see the red recording lights in the darkness. I heard my own voice coming from all 7 figures at once, speaking in perfect unison. You called to us. We came. You asked if anyone was out there. We're out here. We've always been out here. We're the echoes that don't fade. We're the voices in your recordings that shouldn't exist. And now we have enough of you to be complete. That's when I understood. Every time I'd recorded my voice, every time I'd called out into the canyon, I'd been giving them pieces of myself. My voice, my image, my mannerisms. They'd been collecting me, sampling me, learning me. The figures started moving toward me, not walking but gliding, their feet not quite touching the ground. And they were all speaking with my voice, saying things I'd said earlier mixed with things I hadn't said yet, describing my terror in real time like they were narrating their own documentary. I ran. Not toward my car because they were blocking that path, but into the Badlands, down into the maze of striped hills where the trail wasn't meant to go. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I stumbled over rocks and clay, and behind me I could hear them following. But they weren't running. They were calling to each other, with my voice, coordinating, herding me deeper into the canyons. Every direction I turned looked the same, the layered hills creating an impossible labyrinth, and I realized I was completely lost. My backup recorder was still in my pocket, still running, and I pulled it out as I ran. If I don't make it, I gasped into the microphone. If someone finds this, don't come to Blue Mesa after dark. Don't call out into the canyons. Don't record here. They listen, they answer, they collect. As I said those words, I heard them repeated back to me from a dozen different directions, my own voice surrounding me, closing in. I saw lights ahead, thought it was the parking lot, ran toward them. But they were my own camera lights, my equipment still set up exactly where I'd left it, and I'd somehow run in a complete circle. The 7 figures were standing around my gear, watching my footage, listening to my audio, learning more. When they saw me, they all smiled with my smile, and one of them spoke. Thank you for the content. We've been waiting so long for someone to give us enough material to cross over, to become real. You've given us everything we need. My main camera's recording light was still on. Its SD card had automatic cloud backup. If you're watching this, that backup worked. I set my phone down, hit record, and ran one more time. I don't know how long ago that was. Time feels different in these canyons now. I can hear my voice everywhere, speaking from the hills, coming from above and below. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the smooth clay surfaces, but the reflection moves wrong, smiles when I'm not smiling. I think I'm becoming one of them. I think that's what happens when you give too much of yourself to this place. If you're watching this footage, if you can hear my voice right now, stop the video. Don't finish it. Don't let my voice complete the circuit. Because every time someone plays this recording, every time someone hears my voice describing what happened, it gives them more power. It lets them reach a little further. And I can feel them reaching through the screen right now, through the speakers, following the sound of my voice to wherever you are. They're not just in Blue Mesa anymore. They're everywhere the recording plays. So please stop watching, stop listening, and whatever you do, don't call back. I had 40 minutes to make my delivery deadline when the GPS rerouted me onto a stretch of old Route 66 that shouldn't exist anymore, and my fuel gauge started dropping like something was drinking it. I've been driving trucks for 15 years, cross-country hauls, tight schedules, routes I know like the back of my hand. I've driven past the Petrified Forest 100 times, always during the day, always on the main highway. But that night, with a dust storm rolling in from the west, and my dispatcher breathing down my neck about the delivery window, I made a choice that I'll regret for whatever's left of my life. I trusted the GPS when it offered me a shortcut. The storm hit fast, the way they do in the desert. 1 minute the sky was clear, stars everywhere, my headlights cutting clean lines through the darkness. The next minute, visibility dropped to almost nothing, just walls of dust and sand hammering against my windshield. I slowed down, put on my hazards, and that's when my GPS pinged with the reroute. Alternative route available. Saves 22 minutes. I looked at the clock on my dash. If I took the main highway at reduced speed through the storm, I'd miss my delivery window by at least an hour. The company had already written me up twice this month for late deliveries. One more, and I was done. So I took the exit. The GPS directed me onto what looked like an old frontage road, barely paved, the kind of forgotten route that used to matter before the interstate system. The dust was even worse off the main highway, my truck's high beams just reflecting back at me in a wall of brown and orange. But the GPS showed the route clearly. A straight line that would cut through the northern edge of the park and spit me back onto the highway 20 miles ahead. 22 minutes saved. I'd make my deadline with 10 minutes to spare. That's when I noticed my fuel gauge. I'd filled up 40 miles back. Tank should have been sitting at just under full, but the needle was at 3/4 and dropping. Not slowly, but visibly, like I was watching it fall in real time. I tapped the gauge, thinking it was malfunctioning, but it kept dropping. Half tank. I'd driven maybe 5 miles on this detour. That's not possible. My truck gets 6 miles to the gallon. I should have used less than a gallon, but I'd lost what looked like 8 gallons in 5 miles. The GPS showed I was on Route 66, but that couldn't be right. This stretch of 66 was decommissioned in the 80s, torn up and reclaimed. I'd researched it once for a history podcast I used to listen to, but my GPS was insistent, the blue line showing me exactly where I was, moving forward on a road that shouldn't exist. I tried to radio for help, but all I got was static. My phone showed no service, which wasn't surprising given the storm and the remote location. I was alone out here, and my fuel was disappearing. That's when I saw the first vehicle. Taillights ahead of me in the dust, red and dim, and moving at about 40 miles an hour. I was relieved at first, thinking another driver had taken this same route, that I wasn't alone. I moved to pass them, and as I pulled alongside, I got a clear look at the vehicle. It was a 1960s station wagon, powder blue with wood paneling on the sides, the kind of car my grandfather used to talk about. And through the dust-covered window, I could see the family inside. A father driving, mother in the passenger seat, 2 kids in the back. They all turned to look at me as I passed, and their faces were wrong. I can't explain it better than that. The proportions were off, eyes too large, mouths too wide, skin too smooth like mannequins or dolls. The father raised his hand and waved at me, a slow, mechanical gesture, and all 4 of them smiled at exactly the same time. I hit the gas, my truck lurching forward, and I left them behind in the dust. My heart was pounding, and I told myself it was the poor visibility, that I'd seen them wrong through 2 layers of dirty glass and a dust storm. But my fuel gauge was at quarter tank now, and I'd only been on this road for 15 minutes. More vehicles started appearing. A pickup truck from the 50s with a camper shell, a delivery van with faded lettering I couldn't read, a Volkswagen bus with curtains in the windows, all of them driving at the same steady 40 miles per hour, all of them looking vintage, restored, impossible. And all of them had people inside who turned to look at me as I passed. People with those same wrong faces, all of them waving, all of them smiling. I tried to go faster to leave them all behind, but more kept appearing ahead of me, an endless procession of vehicles from decades past. My fuel gauge hit the red zone. I'd been on this detour for 25 minutes, and I'd somehow burned through most of a tank that should have lasted me 300 miles. The GPS still showed the highway was just ahead, 5 more miles. But 5 miles might as well have been 500 with the fuel I had left. I started seeing the same landmarks passing by. A distinctive rock formation, a mile marker that read 247, a bent sign pointing to a ghost town. I passed them once, twice, 3 times. I was driving in a loop, and I hadn't turned the wheel. The road was straight, but somehow it was feeding me back to the same starting point over and over. The other vehicles were still there, still driving their steady 40 miles per hour, and I realized they weren't separate vehicles in a line. They were the same vehicles, appearing over and over in the loop, the same station wagon, the same pickup, the same bus. And every time I passed them, the people inside looked more insistent, waving harder, smiling wider, mouthing words I couldn't hear through the wind and the storm. One of them, the father in the station wagon, was holding up a sign pressed against the window. It said, "Stop driving. Join us. Rest here." My fuel light came on, the ding echoing in the cab, and I knew I had maybe 10 miles left before I was stranded. 10 miles in a loop that I couldn't escape. I tried turning off the GPS, tried manually steering off the road, but every time I did, the road curved to meet me, keeping me on this impossible stretch of Route 66 that existed in the storm, but nowhere else. The radio crackled to life, and instead of static, I heard music. Big band music from the 40s, clear as day, and underneath it, a voice doing a traffic report for roads that didn't exist anymore, reporting accidents from decades ago, giving weather updates for a version of Arizona that was long gone. I passed the mile marker 247 again, and this time there was something new. My truck. My exact truck. Same model, same color, same company logo on the side, parked on the shoulder ahead. I slowed down as I approached it, my headlights illuminating the cab, and what I saw made me slam on my brakes. There was someone in the driver's seat. Someone wearing my jacket, my company cap, with my build and my posture. The figure turned to look at me, and it was me. An older version of me, skin gray and sunken, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. And the truck itself was rusted, aged decades in the desert sun, tires flat, windows cracked. I looked at my odometer, and my blood went ice cold. It was running backwards. The numbers were decreasing with every mile I drove, like I was moving backward through time, and the other vehicles around me were getting older too. The station wagon's paint was fading, the metal showing rust. The pickup's tires were deflating. The bus was listing to one side, and all the people inside were aging, their wrong faces becoming skeletal, their waves becoming more desperate, their smiles becoming rictus grins of bone and dried flesh. My fuel gauge hit empty. The engine coughed once, twice, and I knew I had seconds before it died completely, and I became another vehicle in this endless loop, driving the same stretch of impossible road forever, aging and rusting and rotting, while something drained me the way it had drained my fuel. I saw my future ahead of me, that rusted truck with my skeletal corpse still gripping the wheel, and I made a choice. I cut the wheel hard to the right, away from the road, into the open desert. The truck lurched and bounced over rocks and brush, the frame groaning, and behind me I heard something like a roar, like the storm itself was angry. The other vehicles swerved toward me, trying to block my path, the station wagon suddenly accelerating, the pickup cutting across my bow. But I kept my foot on the gas, kept driving perpendicular to that cursed stretch of Route 66, and the GPS started screaming, not giving directions, but actually screaming, a high-pitched wail that made my ears ring. The truck hit a rock, and the front axle snapped. I felt it go, felt the whole vehicle tip forward, momentum carrying me into a roll. Metal shrieked, and glass shattered, and I was tumbling, the world spinning, my body slamming against the restraints. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the road behind me, shimmering and fading. All those vintage vehicles lining up along the shoulder, watching me escape, their occupants standing outside their cars now, skeletal figures in rotted clothing, all of them pointing at me, all of them with their mouths open in silent screams of rage or envy or warning. I woke up to daylight and pain. A park ranger was leaning over me, radio in hand, calling for medical assistance. My truck was totaled, lying on its side 100 yards from the nearest maintained road. Not Route 66. Not any road I recognized. Just empty desert inside the Petrified Forest National Park boundary. The ranger kept asking me what happened, why I was driving through a restricted area, if I'd been drinking. I couldn't explain it. How could I explain that I'd been trapped in a loop on a road that didn't exist, surrounded by ghosts from the 50s driving forever through a dust storm that never ends? They cited me for reckless driving and trespassing. My company fired me for destroying the truck and missing the delivery. I lost everything, my job, my reputation, my CDL, but I'm alive, and I'm not driving that loop. I see other truckers sometimes at rest stops, comparing routes, bragging about shortcuts they've found. Last month, I saw one pull up a map on his GPS, showing an alternative route that cut through the northern edge of the Petrified Forest, claimed it saved 20 minutes. I tried to warn him, told him not to take it, especially not at night, especially not during a dust storm. He looked at me like I was crazy and drove off. I check the news from that area obsessively now, looking for stories about missing truckers, abandoned vehicles, unexplained accidents. So far, nothing. But I know that road is still out there, waiting for the right conditions, waiting for someone desperate enough to take the shortcut. And I know that somewhere on that impossible loop of Route 66, my truck is still there, rusting a little more each day, with a version of me that wasn't fast enough to escape still behind the wheel, still driving, still looking for the exit that never comes. If your GPS ever offers you a shortcut that seems too good to be true, especially one that takes you through the petrified forest at night, ignore it. Take the long way. Be late. Get fired. Because I promise you, whatever you lose by staying on the main road is nothing compared to what you'll lose if you take that turn onto a Route 66 that shouldn't exist anymore, but does, in the storm, in the dark, waiting for drivers who value time more than survival. I set up 12 cameras across the painted desert to capture the sunrise, and when I reviewed the footage, every single camera recorded the same figure walking toward it, but I was completely alone out there. I'm a wildlife photographer, and I've spent the last 8 years documenting landscapes and animals in remote locations across the American Southwest. I'm used to solitude, used to spending nights in places where the nearest human is 50 miles away. I'm used to trusting my equipment, trusting my eyes, trusting the evidence of what my cameras capture. But after what I found in those photographs, I don't trust anything anymore, especially not the petrified forest, and especially not during the golden hour when the light does things it shouldn't be able to do. I arrived at the park 3 days before the summer solstice, planning to capture a series of time-lapse sequences showing the sunrise over different sections of the painted desert. The light there is extraordinary during that brief window just before dawn, when the layered hills glow in shades of purple and pink and orange that look almost artificial. My plan was to set up 12 cameras at strategic points across a 5-mile stretch, all programmed to shoot the same sequence simultaneously, creating a panoramic view of the sunrise that I could stitch together in post-production. It was ambitious, expensive, and if I pulled it off, it would be the centerpiece of my upcoming exhibition. I spent the entire day before the shoot scouting locations and setting up equipment. Each camera was mounted on a tripod, programmed to begin shooting at 5:15 a.m. and continue until 6:30 a.m., capturing an image every 10 seconds. I marked each location on my GPS, checked and double-checked the settings, made sure the batteries were fresh and the memory cards were empty. By the time I finished, it was nearly sunset, and I was exhausted. I drove back to my campsite near the park boundary, ate a quick dinner, and tried to sleep for a few hours before I'd need to be up at 4 a.m. to reach the central viewing point. I woke up at 3:45, made coffee in the dark, and drove to a spot roughly in the middle of my camera array. From there, I could see 3 of my cameras in the distance, small dark shapes on the horizon. I set up my main camera and waited for the light. The desert before dawn is a special kind of quiet, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing. Nothing moved. No wind, no animals. No sound except the occasional creak of my camera's motor making tiny adjustments. It was perfect. The sun rose exactly as I'd hoped, the light spreading across the landscape in waves of color that made my breath catch. I shot hundreds of frames, adjusting exposure, trying different angles, completely absorbed in the work. By 6:45, when the light had gone from magical to ordinary, I packed up my main camera and started the long walk to collect the others. This is the tedious part of landscape photography that nobody talks about. The hiking miles across rough terrain to retrieve equipment, but it's worth it for the shots you get. I collected the first camera and immediately checked the preview screen, scrolling through the images. They were perfect, exactly what I wanted. The second camera, the same, beautiful. Clean shots of the sunrise with no problems. The third camera was where things started to get strange. Most of the shots were fine, But about halfway through the sequence, there was a figure in the frame, just standing there, silhouetted against the sunrise, maybe 200 yards from the camera. I zoomed in on the preview screen, but the figure was too small and too backlit to make out details. Just a human-shaped shadow. I felt a chill despite the growing heat of the morning. I'd been alone out there, I was certain of it. I'd seen no other cars in the parking area, no other photographers, no hikers. The park had barely been open when I arrived, but cameras don't lie, and there was definitely someone in that shot. Maybe another photographer, I told myself. Someone who'd gotten up early like me. Someone I just hadn't noticed in the pre-dawn darkness. I collected the fourth camera, then the fifth, and my unease grew with each one. The figure was in every sequence, not in every shot, but appearing at some point during the 75 minutes of photography, always in the same position relative to the camera, about 200 yards away, walking slowly toward it. By the time I reached the sixth camera, I was nearly running, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. I pulled the memory card and reviewed the images right there, scrolling through them on the camera's small screen. The figure was there, and in this sequence it had gotten closer, close enough that I could see it was wearing dark clothing, close enough to see that its proportions were slightly wrong, arms hanging a bit too long, head tilted at an odd angle, close enough to see that despite walking toward the camera across desert terrain, it cast no shadow. The sun was rising behind it, creating long shadows for every rock and shrub and petrified log. But the figure had no shadow at all. My hands were shaking as I packed up the camera. I had 6 more to collect, and I didn't want to collect any of them. I wanted to leave them there, wanted to get in my car and drive away and never come back. But those cameras represented thousands of dollars of equipment, and more than that, I needed to know. I needed to see what was in the rest of the footage. The 7th camera was positioned on a slight rise, giving it a view across a wide expanse of the painted desert. The figure appeared in frame 45 minutes into the sequence, still about 200 yards away. But this time I could see its face, or rather where its face should have been. The features were blurred, not from motion or focus issues, but like they'd been deliberately obscured, smudged out like someone had rubbed their thumb across a charcoal drawing, and it was looking directly at the camera, head turned precisely toward the lens, despite being 200 yards away. I collected the remaining 5 cameras in a daze, barely looking at the terrain, just following my GPS coordinates mechanically. Each camera told the same story. The figure appearing, walking toward the camera, getting closer with each sequence. By the time I looked at the footage from the 12th and final camera, the one I'd positioned at the far eastern edge of my array, the figure was standing less than 20 feet from the lens. I could see that its clothing was old-fashioned, like something from the early 1900s. Could see that its hands were wrong, fingers too long and too many of them. Could see that, despite standing in full sunlight at 6:15 a.m., it was surrounded by darkness, like it carried its own personal shadow that light couldn't penetrate. I got back to my car and immediately pulled up my research folders on my laptop. I'm meticulous about my work, and part of that means studying the history of the places I photograph. I started going through historical archives, old Park Service photographs, tourist pictures from the 50s and 60s, anything I could find, and I found them. The figures. Not always clear, not always in focus, but there, in the background of photographs spanning over 100 years, always at the same distance from the camera. Always walking toward it, always with that same wrong posture and blurred face. I found a photograph from 1924 showing tourists at the painted desert, and in the background, barely visible, one of the figures. A photograph from 1957 showing a family picnic, and there, at the edge of the frame, another one. A park ranger's documentation photo from 1983, and standing 200 yards behind the survey equipment, the same figure I'd captured. They'd been there for at least a century, maybe longer. and they were always moving toward cameras, toward observation, toward anyone trying to document this place. I started calculating based on the distances in each photograph, measuring how much closer they'd gotten in each era. In 1924, they were roughly a mile from the camera. In 1957, half a mile. In 1983, 300 yards. In my photographs from this morning, as close as 20 feet. They were closing the distance at a steady rate. And if the pattern continued, I realized with growing horror what that meant. Soon, maybe within the next few years, they would reach the camera. They would reach zero distance. And I had no idea what would happen when something that shouldn't exist finally reached the lens that was documenting it. I packed up my campsite in a frenzy, throwing equipment into my truck without my usual care, desperate to leave. But I couldn't stop thinking about the photographs, about the pattern, about what I'd discovered. That night, from a motel room 80 miles away, I went through every image carefully, examining them in detail on my laptop. That's when I found the worst one. It was from my main camera, the one I'd been operating personally, the one that had been next to me the entire morning. There was a shot in the sequence that I didn't remember taking. The timestamp put it at 5:47 a.m., during a period when I was changing lenses. The camera had been on its tripod, pointed at the sunrise, but this image wasn't of the sunrise. It was pointed down, at the ground directly beneath the tripod. And in the image, in the dust and sand, there were dozens of footprints around where I'd been standing. Bare footprints, human-shaped but wrong, with too many toes. Prints that pressed deeper into the ground than any human weight should create. I'd been surrounded while I was photographing the sunrise, and I never knew. They'd been standing in a circle around me, just outside my peripheral vision, watching me while I watched the light. I tried to sell the photographs to a gallery, thinking maybe I could at least get something from this nightmare. But during the review process, the curator called me concerned. She said the figures I'd captured were clearly photoshopped, that my work was usually so authentic, and she was disappointed I'd try to pass off manipulated images as genuine landscape photography. I tried to explain they weren't manipulated, that I'd captured something real, but she didn't believe me. No one believes me. I went back to my archive, pulling up every photograph I've ever taken in the American Southwest over the past 8 years. Thousands of images, landscapes, and wildlife, and sunrises and storms. And now that I know what to look for, I can see them. They're in hundreds of my photographs, always in the background, always at varying distances, always walking toward the camera. They've been following my work for years, appearing in every location I've documented, getting closer with each shoot. The Petrified Forest wasn't the beginning. It was just the place where they got close enough for me to finally notice. Last week, I took a selfie with my phone, just a casual shot in my apartment. When I looked at the image, there was a figure in the window behind me, visible in the reflection standing on my fire escape. I live on the 4th floor. I checked the timestamp against my other recent photographs, calculating the rate of approach, and I know they're almost here. Almost at zero distance. Last night, I set up a camera in my bedroom, programmed to shoot every 10 seconds while I slept. This morning, I reviewed the footage. For the first 3 hours, it's just me sleeping. Then, at 3:17 a.m., my bedroom door opens. A figure enters, walks to the foot of my bed, and stands there, watching me. It stays for exactly 12 minutes, then leaves. I have no memory of this, no memory of waking, no sense that anyone was in my room. But the camera doesn't lie. They've reached zero distance now. They're no longer approaching. They're here. And every photograph I take now, every image, every screen, shows them clearly, standing right behind me, their blurred faces pressed close to my shoulder, their 2 long fingers reaching around me toward the lens. They've been conducting a census, counting and documenting every photographer, every observer, everyone who tries to capture what shouldn't be captured. And now that they've reached me, now that they're at zero distance, I'm starting to understand that I'm not the one taking the photographs anymore. I'm the one being documented. I'm the one being collected. And I don't know how to make them stop. My grandfather warned me never to touch the Yi bits in, the bones of the giant. But the new supervisor didn't believe in old warnings, and I watched him learn why we don't disturb what's already dead. I'm Navajo, born and raised near the reservation, and I took the maintenance job at Petrified Forest because it paid better than anything else in the area, and because I thought I could handle being around the petrified wood. My grandfather told me stories about this place when I was young, about what the logs really are, about the giant Yaitso whose bones became stone, about the consequences of disrespect. I listened to those stories the way you listen to legends, believing them in my heart, but not quite believing they applied to the modern world. I was wrong. And what I witnessed over the course of 3 days last summer has made me understand that some truths are older than science, and some warnings exist because people learned them the hardest way possible. The new supervisor arrived in June, transferred from a park in Colorado, full of efficiency ideas and modern management techniques. He was the kind of man who believed in data and protocols and dismissed anything that couldn't be measured or quantified. On his second day, he called a staff meeting and told us he'd noticed we were taking inefficient routes when clearing trails, going around certain sections of petrified wood instead of moving through them directly. He pulled up maps and charts showing how much time we were wasting, how much more ground we could cover if we just took the straight paths. I spoke up carefully, respectfully, explaining that we avoid certain areas out of cultural sensitivity, that many of us follow traditional beliefs about not disturbing the petrified wood unnecessarily. He smiled at me, the kind of smile that makes you feel small, and said he appreciated cultural traditions. But this was a federal workplace, and we needed to operate based on efficiency, not superstition. Several other crew members, non-native workers, nodded in agreement. I looked at the 2 other Navajo employees, saw the same tight expression on their faces that I felt on my own, and stayed quiet. You can't force someone to respect what they don't understand. The next morning, we were clearing the trail near the Crystal Forest when the supervisor stopped us. There was a large section of petrified wood blocking what he considered the optimal path for the equipment. He wanted us to move it. I explained again that we don't handle the wood unless absolutely necessary, that this particular log had been in that position for as long as anyone could remember, that there were other ways around it. He cut me off, said he wasn't asking, he was telling, and if I wasn't willing to do the work, he'd find someone who was. Then he walked over to the log himself, put his hands on it, and started trying to roll it out of the way. I felt it immediately, that wrongness in the air, like a change in pressure before a storm. The temperature spiked, heat radiating off the desert floor in waves that made the air shimmer. The supervisor grunted with effort, and the log moved, just slightly grinding against the ground. He called for 2 other workers to help him, and they did. All 3 of them pushing and rolling this massive piece of petrified wood like it was nothing more than an obstacle to be cleared. I stood there watching, my mouth dry, remembering my grandfather's words. The bones remember, the giant remembers, and disrespect has consequences. By lunchtime, the supervisor was complaining about his hands. He held them up in the sunlight, and I could see patches on his palms, rough spots that looked like calluses, but wrong, too uniform, too crystalline. He said they were probably blisters from the work, that he wasn't used to manual labor anymore after years behind a desk. He laughed about it, made jokes about getting soft, but I could see the patches were spreading, creeping up toward his wrists, and they weren't blisters. They were stone. His skin was turning to stone. By the end of the day, The patches had spread to his forearms. He was moving slower, complaining that his joints felt stiff, that he must have pulled something. The rough patches had taken on colors now, the same mineral rainbow you see in the petrified logs, reds and purples and oranges crystallizing in his skin. When he scratched at them, his fingernails made a clicking sound against the surface, stone against stone. The other workers were starting to notice, starting to ask if he was okay, if he needed medical attention. He brushed them off, said he'd see a doctor tomorrow if it didn't improve, and drove home. He didn't come to work the next morning. I got a call from him around 10, his voice strained, asking if I could come to his house. He said he couldn't drive, couldn't really move very well, and he needed help. I didn't want to go. Every instinct told me to stay away, that what was happening to him was beyond my ability to help. But he sounded terrified, and despite everything, I couldn't just leave him like that. I drove to his address, a rental house near the park entrance, and knocked on the door. He told me to come in, that it was unlocked, and I pushed the door open. He was sitting in his living room, and I had to fight not to turn and run. The stone had spread across most of his body now, covering his torso, his legs, creeping up his neck toward his face. He moved like every joint was frozen, turning his whole body to look at me because his neck wouldn't bend properly. His eyes were still human, still filled with fear and confusion, but the skin around them was hardening, taking on that fossilized texture. When he spoke, his voice was rough, grinding, like rocks scraping together. He begged me to help him, to tell him what was happening, to make it stop. I knelt down in front of him, keeping my distance, and I told him the truth. I told him about Yates-So, about the giant whose body became the petrified forest, about the sacredness of those logs that he'd treated as obstacles. I told him that my grandfather's generation knew these stories not as myths, but as warnings, passed down from people who'd seen what happens when the old rules are broken. I told him that I didn't know how to reverse it, that this was beyond medical science, beyond anything I understood. He started crying, tears running down his face and crystallizing as they fell, tiny mineral formations spreading from each tear track. He asked me to contact tribal elders, to find someone who knew the old ways, someone who could undo this. I made calls, spoke to my grandfather, spoke to medicine men I knew, described what was happening. The answer was always the same. Once the transformation begins, it can't be stopped. The only thing that might help is returning what was disturbed with proper ceremony, showing respect, asking forgiveness. But even that wasn't guaranteed. I went back to the park that night with my grandfather and 2 other elders. We found the log the supervisor had moved and performed a ceremony, speaking prayers, offering tobacco, asking forgiveness for the disrespect. We tried to return the log to its original position, to undo what had been done. The desert was silent around us. No wind, no animals, just that heavy waiting silence that makes you aware of how small you are. When we finished, my grandfather put his hand on my shoulder and said we'd done what we could, but that the giant's patience has limits. And this man had not just moved the bones, but had mocked those who tried to warn him. Some debts can't be paid with ceremony alone. I went back to the supervisor's house the next morning. I knocked, called out, but there was no answer. The door was still unlocked. I found him in his bedroom, and at first I thought he was a sculpture, some kind of art installation. He was completely stone, frozen mid-reach toward his phone, every detail preserved perfectly. His expression was locked in terror, mouth open, eyes wide, and when I got closer, I could see that expression went all the way through. This wasn't skin turning to stone. This was complete transformation, solid all the way down. A human being turned into petrified wood. I called the Park Service, reported what I'd found. They sent investigators, medical examiners, people who tried to make sense of the impossible. The official report listed it as an unknown medical condition, possibly a rapid form of calcification disorder, though no one could explain how it happened so quickly or so completely. They cataloged him as a specimen, took samples, ran tests. Eventually, they moved him to a storage facility. Just another mysterious artifact in a park full of ancient mysteries. I quit a week later. I couldn't keep working there, couldn't walk past the spot where that log had been, couldn't look at the petrified wood the same way. My grandfather told me I'd done the right thing by trying to help, but that some lessons are meant for specific people. And the supervisor had been chosen to learn why we respect the old warnings. He said the giant is patient, sleeping in fragments across the desert, but disrespect wakes something that should stay asleep, and once awakened, it claims what it's owed. I heard through former co-workers that they moved the supervisor's petrified body to the park's research collection, that scientists from universities come to study him, trying to understand the impossible transformation. They've labeled him as an unusual formation, given him a specimen number, and placed him in a climate-controlled room alongside other pieces of petrified wood. Nobody knows his story except those of us who were there. Nobody knows he was a man who didn't believe in old warnings until he became one. Sometimes I drive past the park, and I think about him in that storage room. Consciousness trapped inside stone, aware but unable to move or speak or die. My grandfather says that's the worst part of the curse. The transformation doesn't bring death, just an eternal awareness inside an unresponsive prison. He says that's why the giant's bones are sacred, why we don't touch them without proper respect, because they remember what it's like to be alive and trapped in stone, and they share that memory with anyone foolish enough to disturb them. I tell this story to anyone who will listen, especially to people who work at the park, who handle the petrified wood, who think the warnings are just superstition. Most of them smile and nod the same way the supervisor did, thinking I'm exaggerating or mistaken. But some of them, the ones who've worked there long enough, who've seen things they can't explain, they listen. They understand that some places hold power older than our understanding, and that disrespect has consequences that science can't measure or medicine can't cure. The petrified wood isn't just fossilized trees. It's a warning, carved in stone, waiting for those who have the wisdom to read it. And every piece that gets moved, every log that gets disturbed, wakes a little more of that sleeping giant. Reminds it that the surface world doesn't remember what it should, doesn't fear what it must. I remember. I carry my grandfather's warnings with me every day, and I'll never forget the look in the supervisor's eyes as the stone climbed his face, as he realized too late that some old stories aren't myths at all, but histories of what happens when we forget to respect what's already dead. The lightning struck the same petrified log 17 times in 4 minutes, and each strike made it glow brighter. And when the storm cleared, the log was gone, but something was standing where it used to be. I'm a meteorology graduate student, and I've been chasing storms across the Southwest for 3 years, documenting unusual weather patterns for my thesis on extreme electrical activity in desert environments. I've seen lightning do things that textbooks say shouldn't be possible, seen storms behave in ways that contradict every model we have. But what I witnessed at the Petrified Forest during that freak electrical storm last September has convinced me that some weather events aren't natural phenomena at all, but something older, responding to conditions we don't understand, something that uses storms the way we use doorways. I'd been tracking this particular system for 6 hours, watching it build over the desert with an intensity that had the National Weather Service issuing alerts they rarely use for this region. The radar showed rotation, severe electrical activity, and atmospheric conditions that reminded me of supercell formations you'd see in Tornado Alley, not in Arizona. I drove to the park because the storm was going to pass directly over it, and I wanted to set up my equipment to record the lightning patterns. The park was closed due to the weather warnings, but I had research permits that allowed me access, and I wasn't going to miss what looked like a once-in-a-decade storm. I set up my cameras and sensors near a cluster of petrified logs in the Crystal Forest area, positioning everything to capture the electrical activity. The storm was still miles away, but I could already feel it. That pressure in the air that makes your hair stand up. That ozone smell that tells you something massive is coming. The sky was bruised purple and green, colors that made my stomach tight because I'd only seen skies like that before tornadic events. But there were no tornadoes in the forecast, just straight-line winds and what the Weather Service was calling unprecedented lightning potential. The first strikes hit when the storm was still 2 miles out, brilliant white bolts that seemed to search the ground before connecting. Not the typical cloud-to-ground pattern, but something more deliberate. My equipment was going crazy, recording electrical readings that shouldn't be possible, voltage levels that exceeded anything in my database. And then I noticed the pattern. The lightning wasn't striking randomly. It was hitting the petrified logs, specifically the petrified logs, ignoring everything else, trees and rocks, and open ground, focusing exclusively on the fossilized wood. One log in particular, a massive section maybe 15 feet long and 3 feet in diameter, was taking repeated hits. I watched through my camera's viewfinder as bolt after bolt connected with it, and with each strike, the log glowed. Not just the brief illumination you'd expect from a lightning impact, but a sustained glow, like embers buried inside the stone were being stoked back to life. I started counting. 5 strikes, 8 strikes, 12 strikes. The log was glowing brighter with each one, and the glow wasn't fading between impacts. It was building, accumulating. The petrified wood holding on to the electrical energy in a way that violated every principle of physics I'd ever studied. The storm hit full force, wind nearly knocking me over, rain coming down in sheets so thick I could barely see my equipment 10 feet away. Thunder was constant, overlapping, a continuous roar that I felt in my chest and bones. I should have run for my car, should have prioritized survival over data, but I was mesmerized by that glowing log, by the impossible thing I was documenting. 17 strikes. I counted 17 direct hits in less than 4 minutes, and the log was now bright enough to illuminate the area around it, casting shadows, radiating heat I could feel from 30 feet away. Then the lightning stopped. Not gradually, not tapering off the way storms usually do, but instantly, like someone had thrown a switch. The rain continued, the wind continued, but the electrical activity ceased completely. In the sudden absence of thunder, I could hear something else, a sound like wood creaking, like a tree bending in wind, but deeper, more resonant, coming from the glowing log. I grabbed my flashlight and moved closer, every instinct screaming at me to stay back, but unable to resist documenting what was happening. The log was changing. The glow was fading, but something else was happening to its structure. Cracks were forming, not random fractures, but organized patterns, spreading across the surface like veins, like the log was remembering what it used to be. The stone surface was softening, becoming flexible, and I swear I could see it moving, expanding and contracting like something breathing. The sound was getting louder, that creaking groan, and it was coming from all around me now. Every petrified log in the area was making the same sound, responding to whatever was happening to the one that had taken the lightning strikes. I stepped back, water streaming down my face, my equipment forgotten, watching as the log began to rise. Not rolling or being lifted, but rising vertically, one end leaving the ground, standing up the way a tree stands, defying gravity and logic and everything I knew about petrified wood. It was 8 feet tall now, 10 feet, 12 feet, impossibly balanced on its narrower end, and the cracks spreading across its surface were glowing from within, not with electricity, but with something organic, something alive. The rain stopped, the wind stopped, Everything stopped, and in that sudden stillness, I heard it clearly. A sound like wind through leaves, except there were no leaves, just stone that remembered being wood, being alive, being part of a forest that died 225 million years ago. And then I saw the others. All around me, across the entire crystal forest area, petrified logs were standing up, dozens of them, hundreds of them, rising into vertical positions, and in the lightning flashes that suddenly resumed, I could see them clearly. They weren't logs anymore. They were trees, ancient trees from an era when the continents were still joined, when the world was hot and strange, and they were moving. Not swaying like living trees in wind, but moving with purpose, their stone branches extending, their surfaces rippling, their roots digging back into the earth they'd been separated from for millions of years. I watched a log 20 feet from me split open lengthwise, and inside wasn't solid stone, but something wet and fibrous, something that looked like living wood that had never fossilized at all, just been waiting, dormant, for the right electrical charge to wake it. I ran. I grabbed what equipment I could carry and ran for my car, and behind me I could hear them, the forest that should be dead, the trees that remembered what it felt like to grow and reach for sunlight. The lightning resumed with even greater intensity, and in each flash I could see the trees getting taller, their branches spreading wider, and I realized the storm wasn't attacking them. The storm was feeding them. This was what they'd been waiting for, lying dormant for eons, needing the precise electrical conditions to return to life. And I documented the exact moment when 225 million years of death reversed itself. I made it to my car and drove through conditions that should have been impossible to navigate. The storm raging around me, lightning striking behind me with such frequency it was almost continuous daylight. In my rear view mirror, I could see the trees, a forest rising from the desert floor, ancient silhouettes against the lightning-lit sky. And they were massive, easily 100 feet tall now, still growing, still spreading. I drove until I was clear of the park, until the storm was behind me, and I pulled over and sat there shaking, trying to process what I'd witnessed. When I checked my equipment later, most of it had been destroyed by the electrical activity, but my main camera had survived, protected in its weatherproof case. I reviewed the footage, frame by frame, watching the impossible happen again in slow motion, the log standing up, the others joining it, the transformation from stone to something that was neither stone nor wood, but both simultaneously. And in the final frames before the camera's battery died, I captured something that made me delete the entire file immediately. The trees weren't empty. There were things moving inside them, visible through the cracks in their surfaces, things that looked like insects but far too large, with too many legs, bodies segmented in ways that hurt to look at. The trees weren't just coming back to life. They were releasing something that had been sealed inside them, something that had fossilized along with the wood and was now emerging. 225 million years of evolution compressed and warped, crawling out into a world that had moved on without them. I drove back to the park 3 days later, during daylight, with backup and witnesses. The crystal forest area looked normal. The logs were lying on the ground exactly where they'd always been. No sign of movement, no indication that anything unusual had happened. My colleagues examined the area, found my damaged equipment, took readings. Everything was normal. They asked me what happened to my main camera, why I'd come back so shaken. I told them equipment malfunction, said the storm was worse than expected, that I'd panicked. They accepted that, made jokes about fair weather meteorologists. But I know what I saw. I know what the lightning did. And I know those logs aren't logs anymore, not really. They're dormant again, waiting for the next storm with the right conditions, waiting for the next electrical surge to wake them. I submitted a request to have the area restricted during electrical storms, claimed there was dangerous conductive potential in the petrified wood. The Park Service denied it, said there was no scientific basis for the concern. I've been monitoring weather patterns over the park obsessively since then. Last week, there was another storm with similar conditions, similar radar signatures, similar atmospheric readings. I didn't go. I couldn't make myself go. But I checked satellite imagery from that night, and the next morning, there were patterns in the desert I couldn't explain. Areas where the petrified logs had clearly moved, rearranged themselves. The Park Service attributed it to flash flooding, said the storm runoff must have shifted some specimens. But I downloaded lightning strike data from that night, and I know what I'm looking at. 17 strikes in 4 minutes, same pattern as before, hitting the same area, possibly the same log. It's happening again. It's going to keep happening. And eventually the conditions will be perfect enough. The storm will be strong enough, and those ancient trees will wake up and stay awake. I don't know what happens then. I don't know if they'll spread beyond the park, if they'll try to reclaim territory that used to be forest before the continent shifted and the climate changed and everything they knew died. What I do know is that petrified wood isn't dead. It's dormant. And electricity is the key that unlocks 225 million years of suspended animation. The petrified forest isn't a graveyard. It's a seed bank, waiting for the right conditions to germinate. And we're creating those conditions every time we change the climate, every time we shift the atmospheric patterns, every time we make the storm stronger and more frequent. We're watering seeds that should stay buried forever. I've changed my thesis topic. I'm no longer studying electrical activity in desert storms. I can't explain why without sounding insane. But I watch the forecasts, and I track the storms, and I know that somewhere in Arizona, ancient trees are counting lightning strikes, measuring voltage, waiting for the moment when they have enough power to wake up and stay that way. And when that happens, the world is going to remember what it was like when those trees were alive the first time. When the continents were different, and the air was different, and things lived that shouldn't exist in our current era. I just hope I'm far away when it does. I sat on Agate Bridge at midnight because I wanted to feel something again, and I did. I felt the 225 million year old tree slowly waking up beneath me, and I felt it remember what it means to be alive. I'm telling you this story from a hotel room 3 states away, and I can still feel it calling to me every night, whispering through the distance, promising an end to the loneliness that drove me there in the first place. My divorce finalized 2 months ago, and I'd planned this road trip as a way to heal, to visit all the national parks, to find myself, or whatever cliché you're supposed to do when your life falls apart. The Petrified Forest was number 8 on my list, and I thought it would be just another stop, just another landscape to photograph and forget. But Agate Bridge remembered me, and now I can't forget it, no matter how far I drive. I arrived at the park late in the afternoon, too late to do any real exploring, so I checked into a motel in Holbrook and tried to sleep. But sleep doesn't come easy when you're alone in a strange place, and your mind won't stop replaying every moment of a marriage that failed, every word you said wrong, every opportunity you missed to fix something that was already broken. At 11:30, I gave up on sleep, got in my car, and drove back to the park. I told myself I just wanted to see the stars, wanted some solitude, wanted to feel small under the desert sky. But the truth is, I was hoping to feel anything at all because I'd been numb for months, going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. The park gates were closed, but there's a spot where the fence line meets a wash, and I'd read online that people sometimes slip through there for night photography. I parked off the road, grabbed my flashlight, and walked into the park illegally, not caring about the consequences because consequences require you to care about your future, and I didn't. The desert at night is a different world, cold and vast and silent in ways that make you understand why ancient people saw gods in every shadow. I walked without any real destination, following the trail markers by flashlight until I reached Agate Bridge. It's beautiful during the day, this massive petrified log spanning a ravine, perfectly balanced, a natural bridge that's been there for millennia. But at midnight, it's something else entirely. The starlight made the minerals in the wood glow faintly, reds and purples and oranges that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. I stood at one end of the bridge, looking across its length, and I felt drawn to it in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just curiosity or appreciation for natural beauty. It was recognition, like seeing something that reflected what I was feeling, something ancient and alone and suspended between two places with nowhere else to go. I climbed onto the bridge. The Park Service doesn't allow it. There are signs and barriers, but I didn't care. I walked to the middle, to the point where the span is widest and strongest, and I sat down, legs dangling over the edge, looking up at the stars. The stone beneath me was cold through my jeans, and I put my hands flat against it, feeling the texture, the smoothness worn by wind and time. And that's when everything changed. The stone was warm, not sun warm, because the sun had been down for hours and the desert night was freezing, but warm, like living wood, like a tree that still had sap running through it. I snatched my hands back, heart suddenly pounding, and stared at the bridge beneath me. In the starlight, I could see faint patterns moving across the surface, like water rippling, like something flowing just beneath the stone. I told myself it was a trick of the light, shadows, and tired eyes, and an exhausted mind playing games. But when I put my hand back down, the warmth was stronger, and I felt something else. A vibration, so subtle I almost missed it, like a heartbeat slowed down to geological time. And then I felt it wake up. There's no other way to describe it. Something that had been sleeping inside the stone became aware of me, aware of the warmth of my hand, the weight of my body, the electrical signals firing through my nervous system. It was like touching something that had been in a coma for millions of years and feeling it stir, feeling consciousness return. And with that consciousness came memories, not mine, but flooding into me anyway, overwhelming me with sensations and images that my brain wasn't built to process. I saw the forest as it had been, 225 million years ago when this tree was alive. I felt sunlight on leaves, felt roots drinking from soil, felt the slow, patient growth of wood and bark. I felt the ecosystem around me, other trees, ferns, insects that don't exist anymore, creatures that evolution took in different directions or erased entirely. I felt seasons passing, decades, centuries, the tree growing taller and wider, rings adding themselves one by one. And I felt the joy of it, if that's the right word, the simple biological satisfaction of being alive, of doing what trees do, of existing in perfect harmony with purpose. And then I felt the death, sudden, catastrophic, a wall of water and mud and debris crashing through the forest, the tree torn from its roots, tumbling, breaking, being buried under layers of sediment while consciousness faded, but didn't quite disappear. I felt the water seeping through the wood, carrying dissolved silica, molecule by molecule replacing organic material with stone. I felt the transformation happening over thousands of years, felt the wood becoming mineral, while some essential awareness remained trapped inside, unable to die, unable to move, unable to do anything but exist in a prison of its own petrified body. And I felt the time passing, 225 million years of awareness with no stimulation, no change, no relief, just consciousness locked in stone, feeling the pressure of rock above, feeling the slow erosion as the land shifted and rose, and the petrified log was eventually exposed, feeling wind and rain and the footsteps of creatures that evolved and went extinct while the tree remained unchanged, unchanging, aware of every single moment of those millions of years. The loneliness of it was crushing, absolute, a solitude so profound that my own recent heartbreak felt like nothing by comparison. And then I felt it feeling me. It recognized in me something similar, someone alone, someone trapped in their own kind of prison, someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly connected to anything. And it wanted that connection. It needed it. It had been waiting, aware but unable to communicate, until someone came along who was open enough, broken enough, empty enough to receive what it had to give. It wasn't malicious. It was desperate. It had been conscious and alone for longer than my species had existed, and I was the first thing it had encountered that could understand, even partially, what that meant. I tried to stand up, to break the connection, but I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't respond. I looked down, and my stomach dropped. My skin was changing where it contacted the stone. Not dramatically, not turning to rock instantly like something from a horror movie, but crystallizing, tiny mineral deposits forming in my pores, spreading slowly up my legs. It wasn't painful. That was the worst part. It felt almost pleasant. Like the numbness I'd been living with was being replaced by something else, by connection, by the promise of never being alone again because I'd be part of something that would exist forever. And I could feel what it was offering me. Not death, but eternal awareness. I could feel the tree's memories of those millions of years, and I understood that it hadn't gone mad, hadn't broken under the weight of that time. It had adapted, had learned to exist on a different timescale, had found a kind of peace in its prison, and it was offering to share that with me, to pull me into the stone, to give me consciousness that would last as long as the minerals held together, to end my loneliness by making me part of something ancient and patient and Yonghong. I thought about it. In that moment, with the crystallization spreading up my thighs, I genuinely considered letting it happen. What was waiting for me back in the world? An empty apartment, a job that didn't matter, friends who'd chosen sides in the divorce, a future alone. The tree was offering me eternity, awareness that would outlast empires and species, and possibly the human race itself. I'd never be alone again. I'd be part of something that understood suffering and had transcended it. But then I thought about that understanding, about what it really meant. The tree hadn't transcended its suffering. It had just learned to endure it. Those millions of years of awareness hadn't brought peace. They'd brought acceptance of an existence without change, without growth, without any possibility of something better. It wasn't offering me an escape from loneliness. It was offering me an eternity of loneliness with company, which was somehow worse. I tore my hands away from the stone, the movement sending shocks of pain through my arms, and I threw myself sideways, rolling off the bridge onto the hard ground below. The fall was only about 4 feet, but I hit badly, knocking the wind out of my lungs, scraping skin off my palms. And when I looked down at my legs in the starlight, I could see where the crystallization had started. Patches on my thighs and calves that were harder than skin should be, that glittered with mineral deposits. I ran my fingers over them and felt stone, felt the same texture as the bridge, felt my own body becoming part of the ancient forest. I ran back to my car, stumbling in the darkness, flashlight forgotten, just running on pure panic and survival instinct. Behind me, I swear I could feel the bridge calling, not with sound but with presence, with that consciousness reaching out, trying to maintain the connection we'd formed. I could feel its loneliness intensifying, feel its disappointment that I'd rejected what it offered, feel its certainty that I'd be back because it had shown me what waited for me in the human world, all that pain and isolation and impermanence, and eventually I'd choose the stone. I made it to my car and drove, not back to the motel but straight out of Arizona, putting miles between me and the park, trying to outrun something that I could feel wasn't bound by distance. The crystallized patches on my legs didn't spread further, but they didn't disappear either. I can cover them with pants, can pretend they're scars or birthmarks if anyone asks, but I know what they are. They're anchor points, connections to Agate Bridge that I can't sever completely. Every night since then, I feel it. Around midnight, no matter where I am, I feel the tree's awareness touching mine. I feel it remembering me, waiting for me, calling me back with promises of eternal companionship and an end to the human condition. I feel it showing me visions of what I could become, consciousness spread through the stone, awareness that would watch civilizations rise and fall, that would see the sun eventually expand and consume the earth, that would persist in some form even as the universe itself wound down toward heat death. The crystallized patches itch sometimes, especially at night, especially when I'm alone. I've seen doctors, dermatologists who can't explain what they're looking at, who take biopsies that show impossible mineral content in living tissue. They recommend specialists, experimental treatments, but nothing works because this isn't a medical condition. It's a transformation that paused halfway, and the only way to reverse it is to go back and let it finish. I dream about Agate Bridge every time I sleep. I dream I'm sitting there again, feeling the warmth, feeling that ancient consciousness wrapping around mine like a blanket, promising me that loneliness is a choice and eternity is available if I just stop running. I wake up with my hands reaching out, fingers grasping for stone that isn't there, and I feel the absence of that connection like a physical ache. I'm in Montana now, as far from Arizona as I could reasonably drive. But the distance doesn't matter. The tree exists outside normal space in some way. Its awareness spread through the stone in patterns I don't understand. And those patches on my legs are doorways that remain open. Sometimes I catch myself planning routes that would take me back to the park, rationalizing reasons why I need to return, and I have to forcibly redirect, drive in the opposite direction, remind myself what I'm running from. But here's what terrifies me most. I'm not sure I want to keep running. The loneliness I felt before, the numbness after the divorce, it's back but worse now because I've felt the alternative. I've experienced connection with something that truly understands isolation, that offers a solution that's both horrifying and tempting. And every night, as I feel the tree calling to me, offering eternity, offering an end to the fear of being alone, I find it harder to remember why I chose to run in the first place. The crystallized patches are spreading again, slowly, maybe a millimeter a week, but spreading. I think the tree is patient enough to wait, to let the transformation happen at its own pace, to give me time to accept what's inevitable. And I'm starting to think it might be right. Where else do I go? What else do I do? The human world offers decades at best, filled with uncertainty and pain and the constant awareness that everything ends. The tree offers millions of years, consciousness that persists, loneliness shared until it becomes something else entirely. I don't know how much longer I'll keep running. I don't know if I want to, but I needed to tell someone this story, to document what happened. Because if I do go back, if I do sit on that bridge again and let the transformation complete, there should be some record of who I was before I became something else. Before I became part of the ancient forest, aware and eternal and forever alone together with something that's been waiting for someone like me for 225 million years. The tree is patient. It knows I'll come back. And the terrible truth is, I think it's right. Park Service doesn't tell tourists about the room where we keep all the returned petrified wood and the letters describing what happened to the thieves. And they especially don't mention that some letters arrive before the wood is stolen. I'm a ranger at Petrified Forest, and part of my job is processing what we call conscience mail, packages that arrive almost daily from people who took petrified wood and are now desperate to return it. Most rangers avoid this duty because reading those letters gets heavy after a while. All that accumulated misery and regret. But I volunteered for it because I thought it would be interesting. A window into human psychology. Proof that guilt manifests as perceived bad luck. I was wrong about what I'd find. The guilt is real. The bad luck is real. But what's happening in that storage room goes far beyond psychology, and I don't know how to stop it. The Rainbow Forest Museum has a back room that visitors never see, lined with metal shelves holding thousands of pieces of returned petrified wood. Each piece comes with a letter, and my job is to log them, scan the letters into our database, and catalog the wood for potential scientific study or disposal. It's tedious work, reading the same story over and over. Someone took a rock as a souvenir. Their life fell apart. They're begging us to return it to break the curse. Divorces, job losses, accidents, illnesses, deaths of loved ones, financial ruin. The letters are remarkably consistent in their desperation. I started the position in March, and for the first 2 months, it was exactly what I expected. Sad, sometimes moving, occasionally manipulative attempts to blame personal problems on a rock. I processed maybe 40 packages in those first weeks, each one following the pattern. But in early May, I received a package that didn't fit. The letter was dated June 15th. I checked my calendar. It was May 8th. The letter was dated 5 weeks in the future, and it described stealing a piece of petrified wood from the Crystal Forest Trail during a family vacation that, according to the letter, would happen in June. I assumed it was a typo, that the sender had meant to write May 15th, or had accidentally used the wrong year. But the letter was specific. It described events that hadn't happened yet in detail, mentioning the weather on that particular day, describing family members by name and relationship, detailing exactly which log the wood would be taken from, and the precise circumstances of the theft. It ended with the usual plea to return the wood and break the curse, but the desperation in the tone suggested the writer had already experienced the consequences they were trying to prevent. I filed it as an oddity and moved on. A week later, another future-dated letter arrived, this one dated July 2nd. Then another dated August 19th. I started keeping them separate from the regular returns, creating a file I didn't report to my supervisor because I didn't know how to explain it. By the end of May, I had 7 letters describing thefts that hadn't occurred yet, all dated weeks or months in the future, all written with the hindsight of people who'd already lived through the consequences. On June 15th, the date from that first future letter, I was assigned to trail duty at Crystal Forest. I carried a photocopy of the letter with me, telling myself this was just curiosity, that I'd prove the letter was either a hoax or a coincidence. At 2:47 p.m., the exact time mentioned in the letter, a family approached the area the letter had described. I watched them from a distance, saw the father pointing out a particular log to his young son, saw the son bending down to pick up a piece that had broken off naturally. And I watched the father, instead of stopping him, look around to check if anyone was watching, then nod and tell his son to put it in his backpack. I should have stopped them immediately. That's my job. But I was frozen, watching this theft that I'd read about 5 weeks before it happened, watching the future unfold exactly as it had been described in a letter that couldn't possibly exist. I let them walk away with the wood, and I followed them at a distance to the parking lot, noting their license plate number. It matched the one in the letter. That night, I went back to the storage room and reread the letter. It described what would happen to that family over the next 3 months. The son would be hospitalized with a mystery illness. The father would lose his job. The mother would be in a car accident. Their house would have a fire. And at the end of their rope, they would mail the wood back, writing this letter that would somehow arrive before they'd even visited the park. I checked our database, searching for their names. Nothing. They hadn't sent anything yet, but they would in 3 months, and the letter was already here, waiting for me to read it. I started checking dates obsessively, cross-referencing future letters with actual park visitation. Every single one was accurate. A letter dated July 2nd described a theft by a college student visiting alone. On July 2nd, I saw it happen, exactly as described. A letter dated August 19th mentioned a couple on their anniversary. I watched them pocket a small piece on that exact date. The curse wasn't just real, it was temporal, existing outside normal time, operating on rules that broke causality itself. I tried to prevent one. A letter dated September 5th described a woman who would steal wood from near Agate Bridge. I stationed myself there all day, and when I saw her approaching the log mentioned in the letter, I intercepted her. I explained about the curse, showed her examples of the return letters, warned her that if she took even a small piece, her life would unravel. She thanked me, seemed genuinely moved by my concern, and walked away empty-handed. I felt victorious, like I'd broken the cycle, saved someone from the curse. That night, I went back to the storage room to file the letter, and I found a new one in the pile. Dated September 5th, from the same woman, but this version described a different theft. In this letter, she explained that she hadn't planned to take anything, had actually been warned by a ranger, but then she'd tripped near a different log on her way back to the parking lot, and a piece of wood had gotten stuck in her boot tread. She hadn't noticed until she was home, and by then it was too late. The curse had already started. I checked the parking lot footage from that evening and watched her walk to her car, limping slightly, not realizing she was carrying a piece of petrified wood wedged in the rubber sole of her hiking boot. The curse was self-fulfilling, or self-creating, or something beyond either concept. It existed in a loop where effect preceded cause, where the consequences generated the conditions that made the theft inevitable. I couldn't prevent what the letters described because the letters were documentation of what had already happened from the curse's perspective, even if it hadn't happened yet from mine. I kept working, kept processing letters, and the future dated ones kept arriving in increasing numbers. By October, I was receiving more letters from the future than from the past. Letters dated months or years ahead, describing thefts that would happen in 2026, 2027, 2028. The curse was expanding its temporal reach, documenting thefts further and further in advance, and I realized with growing horror what that meant. It was mapping the future, claiming people who hadn't even decided to visit the park yet, marking them for the consequences of choices they hadn't made but would inevitably make. Then I found my own letter, dated November 23rd, written in handwriting that looked like mine would look under stress, describing a theft I would commit. According to the letter, I would be working late in the storage room, sorting through returned wood, when I would pocket a small piece. Not on purpose, not consciously, but the letter described it as inevitable. It would stick to my glove, or fall into my pocket, or somehow end up in my possession through what would seem like pure accident. And once I possessed it, even unknowingly, even without intent, I would become subject to the same curse I'd been documenting for 8 months. The letter described what would happen to me. My girlfriend would leave me. My car would break down. I'd develop a chronic pain condition. My parents would die in rapid succession. My career would collapse. And eventually, broken and desperate, I'd mail the wood back with this letter, somehow sending it to arrive before I'd taken it, participating in the same temporal loop that had trapped everyone else. I tried to quit. I submitted my resignation, but my supervisor rejected it, said I was the best person they'd had in this position in years, that I couldn't leave them understaffed during peak season. I tried to avoid the storage room, but I was assigned there anyway, told it was my primary responsibility. I tried wearing gloves without any grip, coating my clothes with powder so nothing could stick, checking my pockets obsessively every 5 minutes. But the letter was specific about the date, and November 23rd was approaching, and I could feel the inevitability of it like a weight pressing down on me. It's November 23rd today. I've been in the storage room for 3 hours, processing the afternoon mail delivery, and I've been so careful. I've checked my pockets 40 times. I've shaken out every piece of clothing. I've documented every piece of wood I've touched, photographing it in place before and after handling it, proving I haven't taken anything. But I can feel it happening. Feel reality warping to accommodate what the letter described. Feel the curse reaching forward from the future to ensure its own past. I just found a piece of petrified wood in my jacket pocket. The left one, exactly as the letter described. I don't know how it got there. I've been checking that pocket every 5 minutes, and it wasn't there 10 minutes ago. I'm certain of it. But it's there now, small and smooth, and radiating a cold that has nothing to do with temperature. I'm holding it in my hand, and I can feel the curse activating, feel my life beginning to unravel, feel the future that was described in that letter becoming my present. I'm going to mail it back. I know I am because the letter says I will, because I've read my own future, and there's no way to deviate from it. I'll write a letter begging for forgiveness, explaining what happened, and I'll date it November 23rd and send it to this address, and it will arrive in the past, before I took the wood, and some future ranger will read it and understand what I understand now. The curse doesn't travel with the wood. The wood is just an anchor, a physical component in a temporal loop that exists independent of our linear time. The curse chooses its victims before they commit the crime, documents their futures, and ensures those futures happen exactly as documented. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know if it can be stopped. All I know is that right now, in this moment, I'm holding a piece of petrified wood that I didn't mean to take, and my future is already written in a letter that arrived 8 months ago, and everything that letter described is going to happen to me because it already has from the curse's perspective. If you're reading this, if you work at the park, if you're processing these letters, check for your name, check for future dates, and if you find your own letter describing a theft you haven't committed yet, don't try to prevent it. You can't. The curse exists outside time, and it's already claimed you, and all you can do is document the inevitable. The wood in my hand is getting warmer, or my hand is getting colder, and I can hear something in the storage room. A sound like whispers coming from the thousands of returned pieces, all of them telling stories that haven't happened yet but will, all of them part of a curse that maps the future by creating it. I need to mail this back. I need to write the letter. I need to close the loop that's already closed, and maybe, somewhere in the future, another ranger will process my package and read my letter and understand that some warnings can only arrive after it's too late to heed them.